Hello, wanted to do a quick follow-up on Sweden as of April 21st, 2020. I'm not going to get into why I follow Sweden so closely. I assume everybody has the context. Sweden's policy of fighting off COVID-19 is drastically different from most other developed nations. And frankly, I'm actually hoping that Sweden is very successful with their strategy. The first question is whether Sweden is at the point where the cases are going to start coming down. So when we look at this new cases graph here, we see a lot of variability. Things are going up and down, so it's kind of hard to know quite yet. I've created this chart here where you see two lines, the solid pink line and a dotted pink line. That's the pink line, that's the line for active cases. Most countries are not very disciplined when it comes to reporting active cases because in order to calculate active cases, you need to understand how many people are recovered. And everybody's so worried about reporting new cases and deaths that recovered kind of takes the back seat. So what I've done is I've created a calculation. That's the line here in dotted, where basically if somebody's been sick for 2 weeks and I apply the death rate, I calculate of how many people by now should have recovered. So the dotted line for most countries is actually much more accurate than what countries have been reported. So what you want to see, I'm going to click, for example, on Italy. So again, you can see in Italy the solid line is just curving very slowly, but the dotted line is trending down pretty fast. So you can see that Italy has peaked around March 30th and now is coming down. And you can also see the same thing here, but with so much variability in new cases, it's kind of hard to know. The same things are happening in Spain, right? So again, with data reporting issues and other things, the new cases sometimes are kind of looking wacky, but if you look at the active cases in the dotted line, you could definitely see that Spain has peaked around April 5th. One country that's reporting really well is obviously Germany. You could see that they report the solid line and the pink line and the dotted line are almost the same. So that tells you two things. A, Germany is really good at reporting, and B, my calculation is very accurate. But we're not here to talk about Germany. Let's go back to Sweden. So as we can see for Sweden, few things. We could see that, again, a lot of variability in new cases, and we're not seeing the flattening and the dotted line going down yet. So Sweden is probably, looking at how flat it is, it's probably at the highest point right now. The other thing I wanted to say is that the new cases over the last 3 to 5 to 7 days, there's been a methodology change with respect to reporting new cases, where before the new cases, and I believe that's as mandated by World Health Organization, the new cases before were only reported in cases that were quote-unquote confirmed, or where there was testing done to make sure that the case, whether it's a new case or death, were related to were indeed COVID-19. The change took place, I believe, again, 3 to 7 days ago, 5 to 7 days ago, where now not only confirmed cases are reported as COVID-19, but also the suspected cases I reported in COVID-19. So when you see, for example, in deaths, and you see this huge swings in deaths, that the same thing happened in US, where we had one day where there was a huge uptick in deaths, and that's what happened, where everybody went back and reclassified a bunch of deaths, and instead of so now where before there were diabetes or high blood pressure or heart attack deaths, now they're classified as COVID-19 deaths. But let's go back to Sweden again. So we see a lot of variability in deaths. We see a lot of cases going up and down. Most likely this is just reporting issues. Usually these numbers are pretty smooth. That's one of the issues with all of the data that's being reported. We only have the reporting date, not the symptoms date. So all of these numbers have to be really taken with a grain of salt with respect to the time accuracy, because most likely there is days, sometimes maybe a week delay in effect of when actually these things happened. But a few things we can see is the cases are starting to flatten out and the effective mortality rate is going up. So that's why most other countries decided to flatten the curve, because they were worried that as systems gets overwhelmed, the effective mortality rate will become too high. So we're seeing some of that here in Sweden. Again, I was hoping that this dip here that occurred about a week ago would continue, but then the mortality case went up. So how much of this is because of the change in the counting method, but now that we're counting deaths and cases differently from the way we did before, is not clear. But we're not seeing, so at least on paper for now, the rate is somewhat. I guess it's been kind of stable for the last, about a week or so, but it's not coming down yet. Now let's compare how Sweden does relative to other European countries. So here, if you haven't seen my other videos before, we have 3 charts. In the top charts, we're trending 2 metrics. We're trending number of new cases. These are the bars. And as the white line is the effective mortality. And I define effective mortality as number of deaths from day 5 to now, divided by number of new cases from day 10 to day 5 from now. So that allows us to adjust for wild swings in new cases and get a better understanding of what the true mortality rate is over the last 5 days or so. So here we see, for example, if I click on, let's say UK, let's see something else here. Maybe let's say in Belgium, right? So we see when diseases, we only have few cases, effective mortality is low. So in this case, it's just 3%. But as new cases start piling in, hospitals become overcrowded, a lack of resources, so we see mortality go up, and so forth. So that's what we see in the left chart, effective mortality. So that's kind of giving a look at what happened the last 5 to 10 days. And then this is, on the right side is what's happening overall. And then in the x-axis, we see how many cases reported per 1 million of population. So if I click on Sweden, we will see that Sweden was in some way similar to Belgium. For a while, the mortality was very low, and then starting on March 25th, as cases starting to come up, we see the mortality going up, and I was getting really nervous and worried whether the Swedish medical and healthcare system will be able to handle the volume. It seemed to me that it's reached the peak about April 9th, and then cases were coming down, and I was hoping that that trend will continue. Now we have a spike in cases in 16th and 17th. Again, how much of this is spike in cases, how much of it is change in accounting, whether we're now counting not only confirmed cases but also suspected cases, I'm not sure what the definition is. So not here to critique the technology, the methodology, but we may not be looking at the same data here versus data here, right? So this is not necessarily a representative trend. So had we been using the same technique all along, it could have probably peaked a little higher around April 9th, and then these numbers would have been now lower and everything was trending down. So because we're not comparing apples to apples, there may be some misleading dynamic in this chart here. Overall, however, if you look on this chart, we see that Sweden has only has 1,700 deaths per 1 million of population, so it's lagging behind of UK, most of the European countries, and US. So if you were to compare other countries that have the same number of cases per million, Sweden doesn't look that hot, right? So it looks like it has much higher mortality rate than Austria, Germany, and Israel, and maybe even US. But however, if you compare Sweden with the rest of the European countries, countries that have done very severe mitigation techniques and methods, UK, France, Belgium, Italy, we see that the mortality rate is kind of on par with the rest of the European countries, and overall, it's kind of it's not drastically different. Given how drastically differing Sweden's policies are to fight COVID-19, we're not seeing the detrimental effects of that policy. So there's nothing here that tells us that Sweden made a big mistake. So far, Sweden is pretty much very analogous to the countries here. I know that some people will compare Sweden with Denmark and Norway, and those are fair comparisons. However, let's not forget that if Sweden is correct, Sweden will have to deal with one wave, whereas all of the other countries that have gone through very severe mitigation techniques will have to see at least several more waves of this, one coming in the fall, then the spring of next year, and then potentially the fall of the next year again, because from what I'm hearing, we're not going to be able to get the reliable vaccine until the end of next year at the earliest. To summarize, I am rooting for Sweden right now. I'm hoping that we're going to see cases to flatten out and start coming down very soon. So far, there's no obvious signs that Sweden has made any mistakes. Right now, if you compare it with most European countries, it seems to be following the suit of other countries. We are dealing with serious inconsistencies in data, both varying across multiple countries, and even for the same country, the methodology of how of what is being counted has changed dramatically over the last 5 to 7 days. But these are the numbers we have, and this is the best we can do with what we got. So I will keep monitoring Sweden, and hopefully by the time I do the next update, the numbers are going to be improving drastically. Thanks much for your time, and please come again in a couple of days for the next video. Thank you. Bye.